Hi, Sylvia Kwan. I am so happy to have you here today as my guest on Unfounded. Our topic today is women investing in women. Yes.
Woo!
As you know, we have three questions with which we are going to explore this topic. One looks to the past, one speaks to the present, one leans into the future. And as you also know, we've given each other a sneak peek into questions one and two, the one about the past and the present. Question three, the one about the future, that's the wild card. We have not shared that question with each other in advance. It's my favorite part of the segment. And as you also know, no formal bios on this show. So for anyone watching who wants to learn more about Sylvia's amazing career as an innovator in wealth management for women and beyond, you can check it out in the show notes. But Sylvia, I have constrained you to only 3 words to describe yourself. So give it to me. 3 words.
Melissa, thank you first for having me on the show. And by way of introduction, I am a curious ninja panda.
Yes, very, very consistent with how I feel about you. I'm now like I can never unhear those words. Well done, friend. So here we go. Women investing in women. You and I have spoken a lot about women and wealth and investing. I find the work that you do so inspiring. It's those small proof points that things are finally changing. And I can't think of anyone else I'd rather have this conversation with. So we're going to jump right in, and I'm going to ask you a question about the past. Uh, Women have fought long and hard to gain control, to earn or to control their wealth. When you look at all of the barriers that have stood in the way or still stood in the way, is there one that stands out to you as being the most significant or being especially profound?
Well, Melissa, when we first started Ellevest, gosh, it's been, I think, 6 years now, we asked hundreds of women that exact same question. What is keeping you from investing and taking control of your finances? And as you can imagine, there's a whole host of barriers, including things like, cultural norms for girls and boys, the fact that the financial industry was built by men with very little consideration for the needs and perspectives of women, so on and so on. But I think there's an underlying theme and sort of a current actually that runs through a number of these reasons. And that barrier is actually our own fear. So it's fear of asking for more, fear of being more than we believe we can be. It's fear of asking for that raise and that promotion, fear of investing. This is what we heard from women because we believe we don't know enough. Fear of making a mistake, not being perfect, fear of being criticized for being too ambitious. I mean, it goes on and on, earning too little, fear of, how we're being perceived by others. So I
I like
think
it.
we as women, though, need to band together and really quiet those fears in each other.
Banish fear in a giant circle. I love it.
That's right.
When I designed this, I promised that I'm not allowed to respond, and it's really hard to because I just want to I just want to talk about that, but that's not what we're here to do today. What we could do a whole segment on fear and how it affects
Yes.
our experiences as entrepreneurs, as investors. So note to self, we're going to come back to that. All right, your turn. Lay one on me.
So, Melissa, we all know the statistics. Less than 3% of venture capital funding goes to women-led startups. So, as an investor who I know have heard hundreds, maybe thousands of startup pitches, I'm wondering what differences, if any, have you observed between how female and male founders present their companies? And do you think those differences have contributed to the gender funding gap that we see today?
Yes, yes, and yes. There's some incredible research that came out of the U.S. and the U.K. that showed fundamentally the bias in how investors hear pitches. They showed that women are 10 times more likely to be asked about risk, where men are asked about reward. Women are asked about risk mitigation, where men are asked about how they're going to seize opportunity. And I don't know any of that thought capital, but I definitely have seen it on the stage. I've seen it in rooms. I've been on diligence committees where I've seen it unfold. I suspect I've done it myself until I really brought new awareness years to that. I will say, and again, at the risk of broad generalizations, right? There are lots of different kinds of women, and I work with an incredible spectrum of women, and not all women do this. But I do see a really common thread where when you think about startups and startup pitches, there's a lot of unknowns when you're building a company. So when you do a pitch, there's sort of what you know really well, like the strengths. There's like strengths and weaknesses, and then there's all the unknown in the middle. The meat of a sandwich, a startup sandwich, is actually all the things that are unknown, right? And a lot of the men that I've worked with in the past and hear from, they will describe the unknowns as potential opportunity, as being part of what makes the endeavor so exciting. And women will often be more likely to put unknowns as potential risks, that because they don't know the answer, that it must be a risk. I mean, it plays like, I mean, right after your fear answer, I still see that a lot today. And it's a work that I do a lot with women in the C-suite, is to, without losing your integrity and without being dishonest about what you don't know. And I know you don't know. That's like, I get that. But instead of assuming that unknowns are inherently risk, think of unknowns sometimes as opportunities. And so I think these things, in conjunction with all of the other systemic bias, racial and gender bias in investing, and how networks are made, and all, if you put on top of that, yeah, how women tell their stories, how we develop narratives, and how those narratives are seen and responded to, it absolutely has been a huge factor in that. And I do think we're talking more about it and beginning to change that, but absolutely a very frustrating part of bias in investing, for sure. So
That's really fascinating. And you're right. Now I
it's
have
this.
10 follow-up questions that I want to
I
ask you.
know. So we'll have to. Well, we have. I mean, I have had whole segments on that. So it's a really important topic, especially for first-time founders. All right, looking to the present, we are here today in the present day, and I've learned a lot about wealth management from my friendship with you, and I think I've thought a lot differently about it too, both as a professional investor, but just as a grown-ass lady. So I think for a long time, age was used to define how we expected investors to behave. If you're a certain age, you should do this. And I think women are really breaking the mold here, out of necessity, of course, because they're playing catch up, they're doing all different kinds of things. But I also really think women are developing and embracing entire new frameworks for evaluating return on investment, and things that are just blowing the mold away. And so I'm just wondering, what are you seeing on the front lines around that?
You're absolutely right, Melissa. There's that rule of thumb that we're all aware of, that you should have 100 minus your age, in equities, and the rest in bonds. Meaning, if you're young, you can take on more risk, and if you're older and closer to retirement, you should take less risk. And directionally, that's a reasonable rule of thumb. But today there are so many more dimensions to investing. And each of us has unique circumstances and goals that really warrant a personalized approach, not only to investing, but measuring success, measuring kind of that, what does that ROI really mean? It's no longer just about who ends up with the most money and the highest returns at the end of the day. And for women particularly, and this is what we've heard from women, success isn't measured by how much your portfolio beat the S&P 500 or some other arbitrary benchmark, but it's really whether or not she will meet her financial goals, such as, will I have enough to retire well? Will I have enough to help, fund my child's college tuition? And so it's really more of a goals based, it is, investing is a means to a goal, and that's how success is being met.
And even like goals
And I
around
think
impact, right? Like goals around having impact with that too, right? Sorry, I cut you off.
Exactly.
I can't even handle my own format.
It was a great segue. It was a great segue to my second point, is that we are seeing that women are excited about making a positive impact with their investments alongside financial returns. So it's not one or the other. It's really about both. So success is now really measured not only on economic returns, but also on social and environmental impact as well. So it's exciting.
Yeah, I love that. I'm so glad that we don't have to. I mean, we can't follow in the men's footsteps anyway, because they've because of all the mistakes they've made, we have to forge our own path anyway. But in some ways, I'm so glad that this generation of women investors just can rewrite all the rules. I think it's awesome. Again, I'm not supposed to comment, but I did. All right, the number 3, the wild card round, the future question. Oh no, wait, you didn't ask me the present question yet. I skipped right
Oh,
past.
yes.
Yeah, I just got so
Yes,
excited.
yes, yes.
Okay,
So,
hit me up.
Melissa, I want to know, how do you invest in women today that carries the most meaning for you?
That I couldn't have paid you to ask me a better question. It's been a fundamental shift for me in the last couple years of my career, not only as an investor, but just as an advocate, as an entrepreneur. In the beginning, I think it was a lot about, hey, how do we get money into different kinds of companies, into more diverse founders? And I think that's important. People need to keep doing that. But the most important work that I've uncovered, the way I can make the most value, isn't just by writing checks. When I think back about my own founder journey, one of the most hard parts of it was really lonely. I didn't have role models. I had mentors, but they were mostly men. That's not the same as a role model. You can't see yourself necessarily as inclusively in that. And it was really lonely because I didn't feel like I could talk about the human aspects of my life while I was on my entrepreneurial journey. So much of that just was segmented, and I think very artificially. And I think I became a better entrepreneur when that segmentation became more natural. And so I think about now how much work I do with women founders in the C-suite, as sort of like chief myth buster about what it means to be a
I
founder.
love that.
Yeah, like there's so much bullshit out there about like what founders are, and it's all cast through this tremendous lens of bias. It's really dishonest too. And a lot of the work that I do is being like chief myth buster and helping women founders know that and see through that and find paths to success that are make them happy, and make them better founders. And I think also just being there to provide management support, just somebody that you can trust and ask questions to. Now I almost all of my time is spent doing that for women-led companies, for founders of color, and then of course anyone in my portfolio, because I can't leave them out. And I do mentor men too as well, but that to me has just been a game changer. And I think it's really that to me is the true frontier, because the money without that capacity, we're just gonna give all this money out and then blame these people for failing, because the cash without the capacity is it just doesn't work. So I think we need lots of cash, but also more capacity. And that is something that I know when I get to the end of my career, I'm going to look back at this moment and feel really grateful and just lucky that I had the opportunity to do that kind of work. So yeah, that's it.
Fantastic.
Okay,
Well,
now
thank you, Melissa, for the work you're doing.
Now the wild card question, the future. We're going to the future machine, Sylvia, now. So I need sound effects for this show. Okay, so we've made progress creating space for women to think and talk differently about investing, about being investors themselves. But I think these are fragile victories. I mean, that's a generous to fragile victories. It's generous. You could debate how much it's even. Maybe we just move the ball. I don't even know if any games have been won yet. But fragile victories. When you think about this, is there a risk to progress that stands out to you as being really poignant or prescient, not just in terms of holding the line, but in also ensuring that we continue to make future progress?
I think there are a lot of risks, for sure. I do tend to be an optimist, though, and so I do think there is a tidal wave kind of coming. And I think it kind of goes beyond investing. And what I mean by that is, I think today more than ever, and this is where it kind of impacts the future, there is a lot more attention and visibility on women. If you just think about, for example, our new administration, for example, the she session that was caused by the pandemic. So there's a lot of heightened awareness, I should say, with this. And so my hope is that heightened awareness will create that momentum to kind of
Yeah.
like run over some of these risks. And I think, one of the risks, because as you said, we fought so hard to kind of get where we are. I would say one of the risks is women not doing as much as we can to help other women. I still think there's some, some, and it's not so much, selfishness. It's just maybe we don't think about it as much. We don't talk about it as much. So I think having more community around it and
Yeah.
having more conversations like this will help definitely mitigate that risk. And then I would say the third one is, in some sense, I feel like it may be complacency, like, oh, we've
Yeah.
gotten this far already. Yay, we're good. And we're like, whoa, no, we got a long ways to go. We need to
Yeah.
keep pushing and keeping that energy up and not being complacent with the little bit of progress that we have. But
Yeah.
great question. Now I want to think about it some more
Yeah.
and come
Well, when
back
I
to
hear
you
you
next
say
week.
that, when I hear you say that, I think about where you started and you talked about, like standing together, standing in a circle, standing together, and I think that you're right. I'm an optimist too. And I think it's really hard to stop a wave. So I think that we have that in our favor. So, all right.
Let's do it that way.
Last question.
Okay.
It's on you.
Speaking about waves, Melissa, if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing to advance women, what would that be?
Can it be magic, or does it have to be like
Oh, it
work
can be
we really
magic.
have to do?
No,
Well, let me start by if it really was magic, like bibbity bobbity boo, and then we can sort of decide if it's work we can do. I think one of the biggest challenges that a lot of entrepreneurs face, but certainly women and people of color. Who have just been historically left out of those networks of privilege. Thing we have to overcome is think people realize how much informal training entrepreneurs get when they come from these networks of privileges. When people in your family were entrepreneurs, when you go to schools from elementary school to college, where that kind of behavior and thinking is all around you. Forget all the obvious stuff about having a mom or a dad, right, who can give you money to fool around. Put all that aside. Just informal training that really shapes how you develop a narrative and language around yourself as an entrepreneur. I think we don't realize how many women have to learn by effort versus osmosis. And the differences
Mhm.
between learning by osmosis and learning by effort. And I think from all of us, our lives are some dynamic mix of those two things. But as the first person in my family to graduate college, the only person to ever get a master's degree, my father was a pipe fitter at a submarine, base. My mom was a stay-at-home mom and worked retail on the side. I didn't learn from osmosis until later, until I sort of fate brought me into the company of people who taught me about business and things. And, I think about a lot of the people that I work with who have to do double effort. There's like they have to travel twice as much distance to just get to the starting block. And I think how do you compensate for that and recognize that while not taking responsibility away from that person to do the effort? But I don't think most people realize when they come out of these networks of entrepreneurial privilege, how much they picked up by osmosis and how many literal hours and weeks and days and years of their lives didn't need to be dedicated to effort to either absorb that information or those skills. And when I think about that, I am optimistic because I know how far I went, and I see others who started out way worse situations than my own who are now just over here. So I know it can be done. But when you're in progress, in motion, compensating for missing knowledge, you don't have a lot of time and you don't have a lot of room for mistakes. And so I think about that learning by effort versus learning by osmosis, and how can we get more osmosis faster to more people as a kind of great equalizer in our world.
That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
I think about that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think about that a lot.
That would
So
be a little bit of magic. Yeah.
it is, yeah. Like if I could just be like, doop doop doop, it would be
Done.
like some kind of weird sci-fi, right? Where you could put like some
A
training chip
mind
in, but then
meld.
then of course there comes all the troubles with what else are you sticking in there that you don't want to stick in there. So, well, that is it. We've come to the end of our session together, talking about women investing in women, and I really enjoyed it and appreciated it so much, and just want to thank you again for taking time to be with me today.
Thank you so much, Melissa. This was a lot of fun.